Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, my good friend Drew Crawley. Drew, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, sir. Had a fantastic week. As we're recording this, I just got back from Nashville, finishing up some final touches on songs that will be out later this month. So that's
Awesome.
very exciting. And then spent most of the weekend at the Louisville City soccer game and surrounding festivities. So it
Yep.
was very fun.
So let's talk real briefly about music then for you.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, so you can stream, Stuck and Tower Songs both wherever it is that you listen to music, whether that's Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And then I'm not allowed to tell you this, but I'm telling you, the next single will be out on November the 18th. So at the time of recording, or at the time that this releases, that'll be out and available as well.
Fantastic. Good deal. Congratulations. That's awesome stuff.
Thank you.
All right. So, a word of warning. Cindy and I traveled this past week, and we're on an airplane. Plane landed yesterday. My ears have still not fully popped, so the volume levels as you're listening to the show could be all over the place. Yeah, I may be screaming, thinking that I'm talking normal. I may be whispering, thinking that I'm screaming. I don't know. So, if that's an issue, I would ask Drew and Brian to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on volume, but I can see this happening, and so we'll just play it by ear, literally, and see how it works. So,
sounds good to me.
All right, we wanted to tell you guys about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart is a collection of friends. Each of us has kind of our own different show that we put together, and we try to help promote one another as well. We have Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson, where they talk with the distillers across the country and around the world, probably even to parts unknown, into other galaxies. I would not be surprised at that at all. Martian distillers are coming up soon. But in all seriousness, it's a really interesting show. If you are the least bit interested in the distillation process, this is a show that you need to watch out for. Shows usually drop towards the end of each week, usually on a Thursday or a Friday. Alan also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. He does that show with his wife, Kim. They talk about things from the paranormal perspective, and they have some fascinating stories there that you will not want to miss. And then Monday nights, you have an appointment at My Whiskey Den, Monday nights, 9 o'clock. My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king, and they do a wonderful job promoting the craft industry, and they've got a nice little community there as well in the chat, which you will want to take part of. Then, of course, you have our show. Thank you for watching us. We really appreciate it. And we have one more important announcement for you.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere. Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. You're always a pro. We greatly appreciate you and your input. Now, without any further ado, our guest today is Brian Cushing. Brian, welcome to Bourbon Turntable.
Thank you very much for having me on. This is exciting.
Yes, been wanting to have you on for a while now, because I think what you do in your show, the Victorian Barroom, is incredibly interesting.
Appreciate that.
The things where I first met you was at the name just escaped me.
Locust Grove?
Locust Grove, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, was at Locust Grove doing reenactments and of historic distillations with Alan Bishop.
Right.
And that was always fascinating as well. But what you're doing now is incredible.
Thank you.
And very interesting, educational, and authentic. And so with all that, welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We're glad you're here.
I appreciate it. It's been a great journey, and I've just been really flattered at how nice everybody's been and kind of embracing the community's been of the whole thing. I started not knowing if anybody would care, really. So,
no, your show went from like zero to really popular very quickly. And I think that you're pulling on a lot of different segments of not just the whiskey community, but the cocktail community, and I think just history buffs in general. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. And that's what's been neat about it, is all the different perspectives that people are coming at it with. And part of one of the groups that helped us actually get to that level of interest and all that was the folks over at Townsend's. They've got a great channel about mostly 18th century stuff, all kinds of living history stuff. But we worked with them at Locust Grove. They're good buddies, and they had the Victorian Barroom on their show, their live stream, even though we're kind of out of their period. And that really helped to get us out into the living history community. And so when we do these things, we always try to make it so that, since we got all these different interests, we try to make it so that no matter if you've never mixed a cocktail before in your life, you don't have any bit of equipment in your kitchen, we try to break it down to where you can get the experience at home too. So it's not just something talking to connoisseurs, talking to people who do cocktails usually, but if this is just something you're curious about, that you can jump into, because I know it was kind of a mystical thing to me for a long time and that I really wanted to do, but I didn't know how to jump in. So we're trying to get people there with us.
All right. Well, one of the things we're going to do tonight is you're going to walk Drew and myself, walk us through how to make a mint julep. Okay.
Right.
Now that may sound like, oh, mint julep, whatever. I get one of those at the Kentucky Derby every year.
But
not quite, right? So talk to us about this mint julep, and then walk us through how to make it.
All right. Well, this is a neat one. It's actually very unusual for the mid-19th century, but it's going to be a little bit more familiar to people in the 21st century as far as what a mint julep, what we conceive of a mint julep as. It was more unusual then. It's come to be more usual now. Most of the mint juleps you see in the 19th century, the mid-19th century through most of it, they have multiple liquors in them, multiple spirits. It looks like a fruit salad when you're done. But they're delicious. They're wonderful. We love doing that stuff. But in the 1840s, in his diary, and I haven't pinned down the specific date, but in the 1840s, Henry Clay himself wrote down his mint julep recipe. And this is actually one of the few cases in the 19th century where bourbon is specified as the base spirit. More often than not, you actually have cognac as one of the main players in the mint julep. That was just a really popular, really fashionable thing. And when mixology manual writers mention whiskey for a mint julep, it's a lot of times as a workaround, not as what your ideal scenario is. And so this is just really interesting what Henry Clay did in the 1840s here. And it begs the question of what was going on a broader scale with just people making them themselves. So without further ado, because I hate to leave people without a drink in their hand for too long, we'll start with whatever kind of silver or metal cup that you have. Henry Clay himself specified a coin silver goblet, and I have yet to find one of those that's in my price range. So I just use a regular julep cup. If you don't have a julep cup, use a glass. There was a lot of mint juleps in the 19th century that just use glasses. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a few of our mint leaves off of one of the stalks. We're going to take a spoon. He did specify a silver spoon again. You're going to be okay if it's stainless steel. But I do have to say.
So a couple of leaves off of the mint juleps.
There's a couple of leaves. And your spoon. And I do want to shout out to our friend Jocelyn, because we were doing this on the show one time. We said, well, we don't really have a silver spoon, and so she sent us one. So this is the silver spoon from her. We're just going to take those and we're going to work them with the back of the spoon around the inside of the cup. Just kind of express that essence a little bit there on the inside of the cup, and then you can just discard those.
All over the inside of the cup?
Yeah, just around the inside. And then we'll fill it about halfway or a little more full of ice, crushed ice or cracked ice, something fine.
All right, I may be slow, but you said.
Oh, you're good. No, sorry, don't let me move too fast.
You said to discard the mint.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, because I noticed when I pull that out that it's nice and oily.
Yeah. So you can kind of smell that essence going on in there. Yep. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do 2 ounces of our bourbon of choice. I like Old Bardstown in this. It's easy to find. It's delicious. It's 100 proof. What are you guys using?
Got my JTS Brown, similar proofing and It just, $14 a bottle. It's pretty much always at my house and easy to reach for.
Can't beat it.
All right, I've got the Lee Davis
Excellent.
Sinclair, also 100 proof.
Yeah.
Also bottled in bond.
I've got some Lee Sinclair here. I was keeping it in reserve in case we get to something else later. So there's 2 ounces of that. Mix that up so that it's nice and chilled. Get a nice frost on the outside of your cup there. And here's something that's a little bit different than how I would usually do it, but it's very easy. Take another little cup. Okay, we're going to do 1 teaspoon of sugar in a separate cup.
Frosty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
We all got our sugar.
Yep.
Yep.
We'll do 1 tablespoon of water on top of that.
Do you recommend still water or sparkling? Because I've seen people do different things.
I recommend still for this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And just start that moving around. And you don't even have to combine it perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Just get it moving real good and then let it drift over the top of the julep itself.
Drift is another word for pour.
Yeah. And we're not going to mix it up from there. We're just going to let it kind of all settle together. And the imperfect combination of these different ingredients is really what makes this one special. So we're just going to leave it like that. We'll take however many of our sprigs of mint. We'll make a nice little bouquet. For me, it's a little more than usual because the mint out in the yard was starting to show the dryness and the cool that we've had. So
Yep.
work those in your hand a little bit. Start to express that.
All right. Is that too much or is that?
No, that's good.
All right.
That's good. And then you just plant them in there. Get yourself a straw.
Okay. Well, I don't have a straw, so I'll just have to sip it.
And there you have it. It's that easy.
It's not
Cheers.
bad. I like it.
There we go.
Very good.
Yeah, it's not like the mass-produced ones you get at Churchill Downs. I'll tell you that.
No, not at all. Yeah, there's no syrup here. It's the basic, simple ingredients. The thing that I noticed about this one, like I said when we were making it, is it's the imperfect combination of the ingredients that actually makes this one, I think, what it is. It's like the sugar just kind of really stands out to you. Everything's playing, but it's not married.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
if you're watching the show and you thought, okay, that was awesome. So you can go home tonight if you're listening in your car or at work, or maybe you're at home. Pull together your ingredients and you can make this alone with Brian, just like we did. So,
Right. Nothing too exotic in this one.
Yep. No, and that's when we talked about this. We said let's find something that's fairly straightforward, kind of presents the process, but something that is pretty basic that somebody like myself could do. Right.
Yeah, a lot of the mint juleps that were being written around that time might have like 3 spirits in them, and none of them were bourbon. So, and then multiple kinds of fruit and things like that.
Super interesting.
While we're sipping on this mint julep, talk to us a little bit. How did you get involved in the whole Victorian era, for lack of a better word, reenactments, or you use the phrase living history?
Yeah. It's been a long journey. It's been a lifelong journey, I'd say. And I have been a reenactor. I am still a reenactor, go to events and do things like that. I did, I always knew that history to me was something that wasn't just to be read about on a page. It was about an experience. It was about the everyday details of life and things like that. It wasn't necessarily about the wars, which usually are the headlines. It was about life in general. It took me a while to key in on what it is that really genuinely appealed to me. And so I did. I've done a few different kinds of reenacting. I've met some of my best friends, some of the best people I've ever met through that. I did a lot of stuff with Revolutionary War, War of 1812, things of that nature. But like I say, I still enjoy doing that stuff. Some of my best friends are in that realm. But through doing that, I realized that specifically what spoke to me was the mid to late 19th century that fits very neatly within what we call the Victorian period. And the Victorian period, a lot of people, they have a very specific idea of it, but it's literally the time that Queen Victoria was on the throne from 1837 to 1901. So it's a very long period. And that is perfectly where my passion nestles. And it's through every bit of it. It's about the span of a lifetime. And I think I really had the light bulb moment of how specific the periods are that some of us are drawn to. When I was having a conversation after hours one night with a good friend of mine, his name's Kyle Williard. He's a Revolutionary War reenactor. We were at a Revolutionary War event. He's one of the best swordsmiths in the world, literally. But we were standing out there talking, and I was much younger then. I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm loving it and all that. He's like, yeah. He's like, this is good. He's like, I'm really more into the 1760s though. And I was like, wow, that's specific. But that really set me, I think that was really a formative moment that really set me on the journey of thinking about what is it really that I'm drawn to? And it led me into this. And it really, when I look back on it, it really always was. Because when I first started getting into, when I first started realizing that history was something I was into, I started collecting things from history and things like that. It's like what I always wanted to be was the people in the old photographs. Though I'd done all this other stuff, it's like I didn't transition to those other periods. My passion stayed within those periods. And so when I met my wife, Amy Liebert, she literally played Queen Victoria out at the Dickens Fair in San Francisco. And so that was kind of another step to this overall embracing of the Victorian period into our lives.
Very cool.
Because when you think about it, when we talk about the eras of our own lives, we're not talking about really broad broad stretches of time. We'll refer more to decades.
Right.
Hey, or even in music, we're saying, hey, the 80s, that was it. I love the 80s. Or the 90s and grunge, that's a thing. And so we get fairly specific in that ourselves. So why would we think that just because it's something that may have been 150 years ago that we can just kind of say, well, the 1800s, well, okay, that's 100 years.
Right. 1899 was a lot different than 1800.
Yeah, a lot happened then.
Yeah.
So that it makes perfect sense that when you really boil it down.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about what we're doing here too. When we say Victorian, some people don't really know what to do with us who are also into different parts of the Victorian period, because a lot of people tend to be very drawn to the early, middle, or late. And they'll argue over which one's better. It's like Amy and me, we literally are drawn to the entire thing. And it is such a broad period that you can see change over time. And that's important when you're looking at history. Like 1837 didn't look like 1901. Right. But it's important when you look at history because, humans are silly creatures. What we do only makes sense in the context of what came before and after. None of it makes objective sense. It's just what we're hung up on is based on the context of what came before and after, and that's one of the neat things about looking at the Victorian period is how much changed over the course of that time, and you can see that in their mixed beverages.
Right, and we'll get into it more later, but you can see it in the music of that era as well, and the impact that industrialization had on all of it.
Exactly. Yeah. and steam power going along with that, which was one of the driving forces behind industrialization.
Yes.
That changed everything, including our concept of time.
Wow.
So you've got some other cocktails ready to show us.
Sure.
Drew and I will not be attempting these at this time, but we'll watch, and if I get kind of gutsy about it, I may try those later on.
Okay.
But in a safe environment, free from cameras and the potential embarrassment that would ensue. So, Brian, if you've got something else ready to go, let's do it.
Sure, yeah, let's do one. Now, this, of course, this is the beginning of the period. You know, we said the period starts in 1837. This is from the 1840s. This is the very beginning of the Victorian period, and we start to pass into this. Let's look at something from when we started to transition out of the Victorian period, but we were still very much in it. This is going to be an early version of the Manhattan. Okay. The Manhattan, the classic Manhattan, was always one of my favorite drinks. You know, I love making them. I had my philosophy about making them. It was great. And then this just kind of blew it up. All right. And the neat thing about this one, we're talking about change over time. One of my favorite things about this particular recipe is it was from Harry Johnson's 1888 Bartender's Guide. And Harry Johnson put out multiple books over the course of those last couple of decades. But when you look at his 1882 edition, it looks very much like bartending manuals have looked for the past 2 decades. You know, some of the recipes were even almost verbatim for what Jerry Thomas was writing in 1862. The trends were changing very slowly, but by the time you get to 1888, we're starting to round a corner from the Victorian style into what we think of as the classic style. So you hadn't seen terms like martini in Manhattan in his 1882 edition, but you do in 1888. And so what we get is a very early version of the Manhattan. And while it is the root of our classic cocktail, it's got a foot solidly in the Victorian period. So whereas our Manhattan tends to be light and crisp and you could drink them all night, this has a bold, heavy flavor to it, just like a lot of the Victorian drinks did, and a lot of, you know, just what Victorians like to consume, you know, even to their food. It all had a lot of a rich, sweet, heavy kind of flavor. So we can use kind of a smaller glass for this. This glass is actually from the same decade. This is Victorian pressed glass. It's called Cabbage Rose. We are going to get just a small shaker. You can do this with a mixing glass or whatever you have. We're going to use gum syrup. And it just says a couple of dashes. And what I've found that breaks down to is, depending on how sweet you like your cocktail, the problem is with the modern dashers that we get gum syrup, which you can get from Liber & Company. It's not real common these days, but it is out there. It doesn't pass real well through modern dashers, and so we're just going to give it about between half a teaspoon and a teaspoon, depending on what your preference is. And then we are going to do 1 or 2 dashes of Boker's bitters. Now, usually I use Angostura when I do a modern Manhattan, and that will result in a nice drink. But if you're really wanting to get close to what they were doing in 1888, Boker's was a very popular brand at that point. You can see there are people out there making it these days. There's also recipes out there where you can make it yourself. And in fact, some Victorian bartenders were making their own versions of these bitters in their bars themselves. So you can also, I mean, making them yourself is totally accurate to the period. But Boker's bitters, what I will say on this, if you're trying to order it online, look at the shipping costs, because you don't have to pay an arm and a leg, even though some people will charge you that. So just a couple of dashes of that. The next part, you have a choice. And I am going to get a dasher. You can get these. There's a kind of a cork bottom. Look for kind of a broader hole there in the middle, so you can put this in any kind of bottle and dash. You've got a choice at this point with the Manhattan, and Harry Johnson actually does specify that you should ask your customer what they want. It could be a dash of Curacao. And when they say Curacao, they mean something more like a Grand Marnier, not a modern Curacao. This actually did used to have the name Curacao in the title. So if it calls for Curacao in a Victorian mixed drink, use something like Grand Marnier. Your other choice is absinthe. And by the 1880s, absinthe was finding its way into a little bit of everything. Okay, sometimes it might be your base spirit, sometimes it might be an ingredient here. I love absinthe, and so that's what I'm going to use tonight. And I am going to use the absinthe by a fellow absinthe lover, this little distiller. You might have heard of him. I think he's up and coming. It's Alan Bishop's stuff from Spirits of French Lick. So
yeah, I've had too much of that absinthe before.
Right.
So let me ask you this while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Absinthe and Curacao are fairly different.
Very different
Flavor profile.
Right.
So you're really taking this cocktail in two different directions with that decision, right?
Yes. And you'll see that you'll see a little bit more flexibility in Victorian mixology than you do in modern mixology. Sometimes like your garnish is based on the season. So you can still make the same drink, but it might be different depending on the season that you're in. And then you get here in the 1880s, and absinthe is wildly popular, but not necessarily embraced by everybody. It is a specific taste. And I know Alan says a lot of times that he usually finds that absinthe drinkers and bourbon drinkers aren't the same people. Some of us bridge that gap. But so, yeah, it's kind of depending on your taste. And Harry Johnson allows for that in the book to ask your customer whether they would prefer Curacao or absinthe. I will say that dash of absinthe really adds a really neat note to this drink. Mm-hmm. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to do an ounce of vermouth, which is completely a departure from what I would think of in a classic Manhattan. In a classic Manhattan, the vermouth complements the whiskey. In this, they play together equally. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get at least the quality of Dolan. Okay, you're going to want a nice vermouth because you're really going to be tasting it, and you're going to want to use a dry vermouth. All right, which is a little bit different than what you usually find in a classic Manhattan. If you use a sweet vermouth in this, it is just going to be overpowering and it's going to be gross. And I tried this a few times, and I thought I literally just didn't like it. But I was on a show with Shannon Mustafer, who's a mixologist and a rum connoisseur. And we did a cocktail with her that I would have thought would have taken a sweet vermouth, but it took it dry. And that was the light bulb that went off in my head. It's like, that's what I'm doing wrong. This needs a dry vermouth. And that really brought it home. So 1 ounce of that. And then it's 1 ounce of whiskey, and it does not specify what whiskey. If you go on the channel, we have an episode about the Manhattan where me and Ben Eves auditioned like 6 whiskeys with this Manhattan, and we expected Dad's Hat Rye to be the winner because rye is the classic Manhattan whiskey. Dad's Hat has a really bold forward flavor that we figured was really going to play well in this kind of toned down format. And it was good, but the hands down winner, and it was a little bit of a surprise, but it shouldn't have been, was Lee Sinclair. Okay. And that's why I didn't use the Lee Sinclair in the mint julep, because that goes perfect. It plays perfectly with this. So 1 ounce of that. So you've got equal parts vermouth and whiskey in there, which I would never do in a classic Manhattan. And now we're just going to get a little bit of ice in there. It is crucial that you be patient and stir this until it's nice and chilled. It's also crucial that you pay very close attention to the proportions. I've done live demos like this before where I kind of eyeballed it and it just doesn't work. So you want to be sure you get everything just right. And you get it nice and cold. If you can see that on the camera at home, you can see it does not have the deep red or brown color that a modern Manhattan would. It's a very light kind of ambery color, and we're not going to put a maraschino cherry in it. We are going to just get a little bit of lemon peel, and you can use just a vegetable peeler for this, and your objective is to try to get a nice long continuous piece and get as much yellow and as little white as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And you are just going to squeeze that over the top of it like this. This happens on both his martini and his Manhattan, and he's not clear whether or not you are to leave the lemon in whether or not you're to literally use it as a garnish. But what I like to do is, after you've expressed it like that, to just get rid of it, because just that subtle essence of the lemon will greet the drinker's nose, and everything just flows together very nicely, just the way a cocktail should. And I just like that kind of subtle greeting of the lemon without seeing it. And so that is our 1888 Manhattan. And you can definitely see where it's headed, but it's not there yet. It's got its foot firmly planted in the Victorian period, but you're seeing that nucleus of the classic cocktail, which so many people see as the root of cocktails, but is really not. There's a whole generation that came before that, and we start to see the birth of it right here in the late 1880s.
Yeah. Were there cocktails prior to the 1888?
Yes.
Bartender's Guide, that kind of you could track the evolution to coming up with what you just demonstrated.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing I point out too. It's like I struggle with where to use the term cocktail, just because if we're going out for drinks, these days, a lot of times we say we're going out for cocktails. For them, cocktail was a subcategory of mixed beverages. So a cocktail was a specific thing that usually included some combination of a sweetener, a citrus, bitters, and a spirit. And then that's also really, I think, why we say old-fashioned. For an old-fashioned is it's a take on the old-fashioned cocktail. But that came about by the early 19th century, and it was very scandalous at the time. And the reason why it was scandalous was because, bitters were medicine. And you're incorporating this into a recreational setting. And how many times have we seen that played out over and over again with, where our recreational products come from. So it was a scandalous thing. But by the time you get into the mid-19th century and you see all this writing happening about mixology, cocktail is a specific category of mixed drink. And they also have what they call fancy cocktails. But depending on who's writing it and when, the line between just a cocktail or a fancy cocktail is not necessarily clear. The best one I think I've done that I really enjoy is a fancy brandy cocktail. And the big difference with it is that you rub a lemon wedge around the rim of the glass, and then you dip that glass in sugar. So you've got a sugar encrusted glass, and then the rest of it is basically this with no vermouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds delightful too. It's so fascinating to see this because, I love Manhattan. I drink the classic version. That's kind of my go-to when we're out and about. But the lemon incorporation is something I'm definitely going to have to try. That sounds like it would add something really different. I'm not a big cherry person either, so that's a nice little twist to put on it.
Well, and one thing we've done here too, the funny thing is this dawn of these classic recipes, his recipe for the martini and the Manhattan are actually very similar. The only differences are that the martini has gin, Old Tom gin, not London Dry, and the Manhattan has whiskey, but the martini does not have an option for gin or for absinthe, even though absinthe can really play well with gin in some settings. And so actually my wife is taken to like rinsing her martini glass with absinthe and things like that because of some of these things we've done in the Victorian period, just kind of like experiment with that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting to see where this is all being born from.
Fascinating stuff. Well, before we get too much further into the show, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to tell everybody specifically about the Victorian Barroom show and how people can find you.
Thank you. Yeah, we are, our main, of course, thrust is on YouTube. It is the Victorian Barroom. YouTube has not fully embraced us yet, so it will ask you if you mean the Victorian bathroom. No, we are at the Victorian Barroom, and that's where we're releasing most of our material. We've been a little dormant here for a month or so, but we've got some good stuff about to come up. We spent a week out at a reconstructed mining town in Colorado, and we're working on about 10 episodes with them. So look out for that. We're going to be talking about ICE here soon. We're also on Instagram. Currently, it's Notes from the Victorian Man. That might also be changing to the Victorian Barroom soon, since that's most of what we talk about. And then Amy just created a Facebook page today for the Victorian Barroom. If you want to get in touch with me directly, you can direct message me over Instagram, or you can send me an email at cushing.brian@gmail.com. We do in-person events. They're a lot of fun, and I'd love to talk to you about it.
That's fantastic. Now, have you considered starting a Victorian bathroom page?
Here's the thing. We're going to break this algorithm by doing cocktails from a Victorian bathroom.
Yes.
And we know where the bathroom is. It's just, we had a lot, I forget what the problem was. There's been so many weird things happen this year. Something happened where we weren't able to get to it. But there is a specific bed and breakfast in Columbus, Indiana. We don't care what we got to pay them to be in there, but they've got a glorious Victorian bathroom in there. And I am going to sit in a clawfoot tub with a shaving tray in front of me, and we're going to sample some things and figure out what is the perfect Victorian cocktail for the Victorian bathroom.
I like that plan. That's fantastic.
That's awesome. If you need like a key grip or somebody to hold a boom mic, Drew and I could be up there for you.
I will keep that in mind.
Yeah, but make sure you've got plenty of bubbles in that bath.
Oh, there's gonna be lots of bubbles. Yeah,
good. We don't want to know you that well, Brian.
No. Yeah, we'll use bubbles.
All right. Well, let's talk a little music. Okay. And before we're going to talk some Victorian music in a little bit. But I want to talk with you about your music, where you're coming from, what shaped you in music. And then maybe we'll do another cocktail in between. But your first concert was what?
I've never been a big concert guy. I would say my first and definitive concert was Metallica and Godsmack. Sometime in the early. My first concert was probably a country music thing at the Kentucky State Fair, which was a lot of fun. But I think one of my only, and it was just a great experience, was Metallica and Godsmack sometime in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
Seems like a fun tour to be on.
What's that?
That sounds like a fun tour to be on.
It was. Yeah.
What about first album? Do you remember that?
Kill 'Em All? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant
Metallica. Yeah.
I liked the Beatles a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And that transitioned into heavy metal and things like that for a long time. And I want to say the first one I bought was probably Master of Puppets.
Oh.
Which,
right.
Yeah, it was not new at that point. And I forget why that was the one, but there was something that grabbed me about it. And I want to say that was the first big one.
Very cool. That one's making a little resurgence now with the Stranger Things.
Oh, really?
All that, yeah. I don't know if you've kept up with that, but there's one very important scene where Master of Puppets, the song is very, very important in the plot. And
gotcha.
It's seemingly all on the radio now and all over TikTok. It's just crazy.
That's awesome. Those were very long songs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's funny. It's like I don't revisit it much anymore, but I do, and it's always in my truck with me. Because it's like if I'm having a rough drive or something, it's like I don't relate well to automobiles. That'll kind of get me through it sometimes.
Yeah. A little Metallica will do that.
Yeah.
It may lead to a little road rage too, but
Right.
You do what you got to do. Now, you are also a musical performer as well.
I was. Yeah, I haven't done it in a while, but briefly, we had a band. It was called Electric Wake. It was a play on Electric Funeral. My brother was one of our guitarists. He came up with the name. It's Electric Wake, obviously like an Irish wake was what we were thinking of.
Right.
But yeah, we were very Metallica, Megadeth kind of inspired.
Mm-hmm.
And we did our thing for a while. And as happens in your early 20s, groups of friends go their separate ways, and still love all those guys. But I haven't picked the bass up in a very long time. But it was fun. It was a lot. Yeah, that's it. That's me.
That is a look. Now,
I cultivated that look.
My question is, did Amy know you then?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we've only known each other for the past 10 years, a little bit more. That was not quite 20.
Well, I'll give you this.
Yeah.
Whatever look you're going for, you're authentic.
Okay? I appreciate that.
And whether it's I'm the bassist in a heavy metal band or I'm the Victorian man, you're going with the look to the end. And
I appreciate that.
Kudos to you. Because I don't know that I've ever seen you where you were not dressed authentically Victorian era.
Well, thank you. I don't really not.
So like if you're going to Walmart to buy paper towels,
this is how I look.
You're going out like that.
Yeah.
I mean that's commitment to the cause, right?
Well, it's I think it's a little bit simpler than that, and it's not as hard as it sounds because I found where I was comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I think even back then in the heavy metal days, I knew this is where I was comfortable. I was just still feeling my way around life as you do in your early 20s, and trying to figure out where I belonged. And, I had fun with all that stuff, but I think this is always where I was heading. And it's just when you do this kind of thing, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with doing it anywhere. It's like right. It's getting comfortable with the fact that some people love it, some people hate it, and it doesn't really matter. So
right. But it's not a character or a shtick. It is, this is who I am, this is how I'm comfortable, this is Brian,
right?
And there you go.
Yeah, I've actually gotten to the point where I don't really like playing characters anymore.
Yeah.
That was part of my early living history experience. It was a great one. And I even, part of my career was even managing that kind of thing. But it's like the last time I did a performance as a character, I didn't enjoy it. And that's because I think I had rounded a corner into it being more about just life. Not necessarily about telling a story, but about doing, right. Basically.
Right.
And so that's what I really enjoy now. And I think that's where I was always headed. It just took a long time to get there. Which, any journey does, that's just all part of growing. But yeah, it's not a character. The Victorian Barroom is not a reenactment unto itself. It's like, when people come on the show, they're like, well, do I got to dress Victorian? It's like, no, it's like, I'm bringing you on the show because I want you to be you. I want you to talk about what you're doing. We're doing what you're doing. And I want to bring you in on that. So yeah, it's not a persona. It's just me.
Yeah. I greatly respect that.
Well, thank you.
I think that's incredibly, again, to use the word again, it's incredibly authentic to who you are and to the era that you have embraced.
Well, thank you. Well, and it's like people talk about, it's like, well, making clothes and things like that. It's like, wow, that's a lot of work. It's like, well, yes, but it's a drive. There's a drive to do it. And so it's like, you wouldn't be doing anything else. It's not like you're taking time away from something else to do that. That's all you want to do.
Right.
So.
Right. So when you did play, do you play any music now at all?
I don't. And I feel like I should. It's like I kind of would like to again. It's just my attention is so focused, and music takes so much focus. I think it'd be great to find my way back around to that, but presently I don't.
Yeah,
I would love to pick up like the 19th century banjo.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, it's something like that would be the perfect fit into what you're doing. And your background as a musician would, I think, help you shorten that learning curve for sure.
Yeah.
So.
I remember in the heavy metal days, it's like I love listening to bluegrass and things like that. As I'd be listening to Flat and Scruggs,
right?
And I'd be like, these guys would make the perfect lead guitars.
Mm-hmm. There is a great overlap between heavy metal and bluegrass music in terms of some of the technical skill required to play it. I've got a good buddy who's turned me on to a couple of bands he calls thrash grass, which is sped up, kind of heavy toned bluegrass music. It's a lot of fun.
That does sound neat.
You're not the first to notice that interplay there. That's cool. I like that. We should talk about that offline.
Yeah.
So, and I've got to show this picture again.
There I am.
So, when you were playing music, did you guys just decide, hey, we're going to start a band, and you got elected to be the bass player, or had you taken up the bass anyway, or how did that all come about?
It all centered around that band. My brother Kevin was taking he embraced music before I did, and he was taking guitar lessons, and he was getting more and more interested in this kind of thing. And we started talking with some friends who also were in that. Who had musical experience. I probably had the least musical experience of anybody in that band. And it's like there was the talk between whether I was going to be the drummer, the bass player, or the lead singer. And when I tried to be the lead singer, I sounded like a country singer, which wasn't working for the heavy metal thing. And so it's like we were in a studio one time recording a couple of tracks, and I tried my hand at it. And the guy was like, he's like, "You're not bad, but you sound like you should be singing about your truck." That was pretty much the end of that. So ultimately, I picked up the bass, and it was something that I got comfortable with, and I kind of helped learning the ropes of that whole thing, and ultimately, I got into writing my own parts and things like that. And so it was a neat journey, and it's one of those things. It's like, am I sorry it ended? Yeah, maybe kind of, but it's just kind of the way life evolves. So yeah, we were some like-minded people. We were into the same kind of thing, and we got together. We had some good times. We recorded some good tracks. And we had an especially good song that never actually got recorded, which I always regret to this day because it's way too long now to probably get that back together. But yeah, that's how it happened. It's like I was the least experienced of everybody, and that's what I picked up.
I think that's very interesting, and I love hearing those stories. But let's talk about some Victorian era music, because as you and I've traded some emails back and forth leading up to this show, what surprised me is the diversity of music during that era. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair statement? How do you see that?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, when you asked me the question early on, let's play some Victorian music. I mean, my first reaction was like, yeah, great. And then it's like I stepped back and I asked myself, what exactly is that? Because I knew I enjoy it. I listened to it. I hadn't really thought deeply about what it is, and I like classical music, things like that. That's mostly what I listen to these days, like classical folk kind of stuff. And most of it was played during the 19th century. One of the things I started thinking about when we started talking was not all of it was Victorian music. So I love Vivaldi. He was composing 100 years prior, even though his music was being played in the Victorian period, and to this day, that's a composer that really speaks to me. So I didn't include any of that because it's not Victorian. Vivaldi is very much 18th century, who is just still enjoyed in the Victorian period. And so I started looking at these different categories that existed, and one of them is very much what we would call classical. For us, looking back 150 years later, it's all maybe jumbled up in one big classical ball. You talk about Strauss, you talk about Wagner, and all this, but to them it was distinctive. It had a specific character, and I don't know that I can really comment on that intelligently. I don't know that we really talk about that a lot over email. But one of the composers that I did highlight in there, which I used in one of the Victorian Barroom videos, was Eric Satie. And he was, by all accounts, a real weirdo. Like, him and all his friends were just some weird dudes. But it was in the 1880s again. So we're starting to see this transition, this real departure from the early Victorian into the late, then into what we think, like, into the 20th century. But Eric Satie had this very minimalist, simplistic kind of piano score that he would do. And most people have probably heard some of his pieces and not even realize they were listening to Victorian music, because it's been incorporated into documentaries and movies and things like that. And one of the pieces that I sent to you was actually the third part of a 3-part set. And I'm not French and I can't pronounce what it was, but it was, but it's just, to me, it's a very simple moving piano piece. It speaks to me because it speaks to me. I tend to like sad songs, honestly. But that particular one I played when I knew something major in my life was ending, and it wasn't bad. It was not a bad thing. It was just something that had to be. And so that's why that tune spoke to me. But then I also used it in a video on the Victorian Barroom that I just called Absinthe Impressions. There's no mixology in it at all. I just combined that piece, which was recomposed, what we would call a remix today by Debussy in the late 1890s. He made it into a symphony, which was really beautiful. And it felt like absinthe to me. And we had just done a video on absinthe. And so I literally went through all of my image files. My image files are organized in a timeline, so I can track progression of trends and things like that. And so I just kind of scrolled through them and figured out which paintings and photographs and things like that felt like, from the late 19th century and early 20th century, felt like absinthe to me. And so I just kind of arranged those around this piece by Eric Satie, remixed by Debussy as a video about absinthe, which was a great late 19th century trend. And then, of course, you get the whole kind of folk trend too. One of the ones I sent you was kind of from just kind of like popular music from the Civil War era, and a lot of that was what we would think of as folk tunes today. And then Irish rebel tunes. They tend to be, people who love that stuff tend to plaster them over a very wide swath of history, and I never don't love it when I hear it. But a lot of them were actually composed in the 19th century and the Victorian period.
Yeah. Stephen Foster was in that era, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Ragtime came about in that era. Right.
Ragtime emerged at the very, very end. It was the last few years of the 1890s, and that's when Scott Joplin wrote some of his most, to this day, most recognizable tunes. Right. Not The Entertainer. That came in the 20th century. But some of his most recognizable tunes. And so, that's a real sign that as we exit the 19th century, we're really entering the 20th. You've got ragtime, which leads to jazz. You can see where blues and rock and roll come out of that trend. And, it seems so quaint and so traditional these days, but can you imagine being in the 1890s when that's not what you were used to, how radical that sounded.
Right. And another that was along the classical lines was the Berlioz Symphony Fantastique.
Hector Berlioz, it was the Dance of the Witches' Sabbath. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. His portrait is really great. He's the quintessential turd of the 1850s man. But there's about a 2-minute slice of that particular composition, which is the earliest Victorian music sticks in my head. And I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, or that's where my life was headed. But I was in grade school. I was probably not even 10 years old yet. And I think it was around Halloween, and a music teacher played this piece for us on a record album, because that's how we listened to music at that point. But yeah, it's like ever since then, this piece of music stuck in my head, and it was well into the era of YouTube when I realized, wait a minute, I could look that up, and I bet I could find it. And I did. And so it's like it lay dormant, not dormant, it was active in my head for all these years. But yeah, that piece of music, The Dance of the Witch's Sabbath by Hector Berlioz, has been in my head for most of my life, and that's a great middle of the Victorian period composition.
Yeah, and all of the music that we're talking about from the Victorian era will be included in the playlist that will accompany this show, so everybody will have a chance to go back and listen to all of that. And I encourage you to do so, because again, you're covering a lot of territory in those 6 decades or whatever that was the Victorian era, but that particular Berlioz tune was in The Shining.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yep. And in Sleeping with the Enemy.
Okay.
And also sampled in a Lil Wayne song.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know any of this. That's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, you can look that up. But it's clearly there in the song. So
yeah,
I think
let's need to see these guys. I mean, their influence stays. The staying power of all this.
Yeah.
And that's one of the neat things about the Victorian period in general is that, and Amy and me have talked about this a lot, that no matter what you're looking at, it's very foreign and very familiar all at the same time.
I like that. Yeah. Because a lot of it you'll hear. I mean, when you all go who are watching the show, when you listen to this playlist, there'll be several pieces that you'll say, "Oh, I know that." I know that. So,
and it's worth it to just kind of turn everything else off, turn the lights down, sit with a drink, and just kind of relax and let it flow through you.
Right. Right. No, I agree. Now, the way people consumed music changed during the Victorian era.
Yes. At the dawn of the Victorian era, it was live, period. There was no other option. People played music, and that certainly continued through the entire period. And of course, who you are influenced how you consume that music. So, a certain kind of people were seeing the opera, a certain kind of people were playing a banjo or a violin in the barn, right. Just depending on who you were. And by the end of the Victorian period, you have recording. You had the wax cylinders and things of that nature, the early kind of like phonograph kind of things. The tragedy is that the wax cylinders were not as durable as the records were. And so I have stacks of early 20th century records. There are very few, if any, Victorian wax cylinders that are playable to this day because they just got worn out. And so when you watch the movie From Hell, which takes place in 1880s London, it's about Jack the Ripper. The music that they have coming out of those machines, they actually composed for that movie in the spirit of the Victorian period. Wow. And I assume because a lot of that was not accessible, and it reads very true. And so it was an interesting opportunity for them to create their own soundtrack that kind of fit the period and fit the movie. But so, yeah, it's like a lot of that does not survive to us to this day, even though they had recorded music, but it was there. Yeah.
But also saloons became more of the standard, music halls. Bands. That was all of that really came about during the Victorian era, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't mean to say that you didn't see music performed live if you were, of a lower class. But yeah, no, music halls, saloons, things like that. Music was very much done there. There were the player pianos, even if you didn't have somebody to do it yourself. But yeah, that was all different grades and levels of society experienced that kind of environment. And you would have more of the popular the newer popular music in those kind of settings, which again, to us, if we look at it in retrospect, feels kind of quaint, but to them was very cutting edge. Yeah. And there's some really neat paintings from the late 19th century, especially like the 1890s, of music halls. And just, they're portraying really regular on into seedy kind of people in these places. So yeah, that was kind of an everyman's place to experience music.
Right. And more people owned instruments. That became music became more accessible during that era.
Yeah. And that's really, again, with the dawn of manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And so musical education was always, if you were in a place where you could do it, and what strata you were at really kind of influenced what you could do, probably what you could own. A violin is a very expensive thing. But by the time you get into the late 19th century, even the mid 19th century, you're into a very industrialized society. And it's not on the level that we are today. It's like you didn't have the level of disposability that we do now. It's like clothing was not a disposable commodity, even when it was, at the dawn of its manufactured presence. But yeah, by the end of the 19th century, you could go into the Sears Roebuck catalog and a violin was available to you. And any other kind of instrument was available to you. It might not have been cheap, but you could get it and they were around in quantity. They weren't necessarily a specially made artisan good.
Yeah. Well, before we let you go, you have time to do one more cocktail for us.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Let's do that.
All right, let's, I was hesitant whether or not I was going to do this tonight, but we're going to try it.
I like it. We're getting bold. We're getting bold. I like it.
Okay, this is the Whiskey Daisy from 1888. This is also from Harry Johnson's Bartender's Guide. We actually have a new video out about this. We did this in Colorado. This took me a while to really get at how I was happy with it. It's a very fancy, very neat drink, and Harry Johnson says just about anybody will like this. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take about a half a tablespoon of sugar. Not quite as organized tonight as I am sometimes. We're going to mix this in the glass first. And when they say just sugar, feel free to use white granulated sugar. When they say powdered sugar, they're not necessarily talking about what we think of as powdered sugar. They're talking about sugar in a powdered form like this. In general, when you do something like that, you're going to want about twice that quantity or more of water to dissolve it with. And when they say to dissolve the sugar in the water, that was my cat that just jostled the camera. He's still jostling the camera. There he goes. Okay. When they say to dissolve the sugar in water, actually do that. People ask me sometimes, it's like, can I just use simple syrup? Well, yes, you can. It's not going to be quite the same if you do that.
Mm-hmm. What's the cat's name?
That's Pilkington.
Pilkington.
Yeah, he was named after an old volunteer at the historic site I used to work at. We'd already named a cat Fred, and we had a volunteer named Fred, and Fred's best friend was Bob. And it's like, we know too many people named Bob, and Bob's last name was Pilkington, so we named him Pilkington.
Okay.
He was a veteran of Battle of the Bulge. Okay, to that, and pardon my modern containers tonight. We're going to do a couple of dashes of both lemon and lime juice. Okay, they say a squirt of siphon seltzer in the actual recipe. You can feel free to use a little bit of club soda. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brian, can you move your silver mixing
yes.
glass? Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
We pretty much just got... Okay, To that, you're going to add 2 ounces of whiskey. And this is one more case where he leaves the whiskey ambiguous. You can choose whatever appeals to you at this point. This is Bourbon Turntable, so we can absolutely use a bourbon. I've also found a rye to work well with this. I don't have a rye with me tonight, so we're just going to go ahead and use Old Bardstown again, because I like to guard the Lee Sinclair.
Well, but Old Bardstown works with just about everything, and it has a fairly unique flavor profile unto itself.
It does. It's one of the most accessible whiskeys that has just a little bit of that grainy must to it that I like. I like tasting. I like knowing I'm drinking a product of grain. Now, here's the other really neat thing about this. We are going to do half a pony, which is half an ounce or 1 tablespoon of yellow chartreuse. And that's one thing we didn't really get into tonight was the staples of the Victorian bar, but chartreuse was one of those. The yellow was the latest. The green came about at the very beginning of the period around 1840. The Carthusian monks had been making chartreuse for a long time. It's a very heavily botanically infused liqueur. Once again, kind of like bitters, it started out as a remedy which kind of made its way into recreation. And so the green chartreuse coming out in 1840 kind of just acknowledged that that's where it had gone. And then the yellow chartreuse is a little bit more approachable than that. I like yellow chartreuse as an ingredient. If I'm going to actually just sip on something, I'd rather it be the green, but you're going to want to dilute it quite a bit.
You say about an ounce? Is that?
That's half an ounce. And so half an ounce is 1 tablespoon.
Okay.
And now we're going to put that into our shaker. Going to get some ice on top of that. And this is another one we're going to kind of use crushed ice for. And give that a good, nice stir until it's nice and chilled. This is one of those ones that has a little bit of flexibility to it because you're going to strain it into the glass. And these days we can just go to the supermarket and get whatever drink or whatever fruit we want. But Harry Johnson said to just dress this with fruit in season. I don't actually have any fruit with me tonight, so we're just going to have it like this. This is the Whiskey Daisy. As you can see, this goblet holds about 6 ounces, and there's only 2 ounces of whiskey in there. And so this is kind of a nice, toned down, easy sipper that'll serve you really nicely.
Very nice.
And it's very good. The chartreuse especially is just enough to really complement that good whiskey. You know, you want to use a whiskey that really does have a character to it. It's not going to get lost in there. And that's why sometimes I prefer a bold rye, but a nice bourbon works really well in this too. And the chartreuse really just kind of complements it great.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Whiskey Daisy.
Love it. Whiskey Daisy. All right. So as we're wrapping up the show here, first of all, thank you, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating to have you on here. But go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you on social media again.
The primary way is the Victorian Barroom on YouTube. On Instagram, we are at Notes from the Victorian Man. Soon you might be finding us under the Victorian Barroom. We're also on Facebook at the Victorian Barroom. And please feel free to send me an email directly if you have any kind of inquiry. You might want to work together. That's cushing.brian@gmail.com. Cushing.brian@gmail.com. Would love to talk to you. And we're just kind of having a fun journey doing with this with everybody.
It's fantastic. I'm very happy for you and the success you've had with it.
Thank you.
Drew, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DrewCrawley63 and on Instagram at Drew.Crawley63 for the music.
Awesome. Bourbon Turntable We're on YouTube. You can watch the show. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Google services. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page where we release all of our shows. We have a Facebook group where we encourage folks to join in, post what you're doing, what you're listening to, and what you're drinking while you're listening to it. So we hope that you'll join us in all of those places. So we want to tell you also, we usually use this time at the end of the show to tell you about shows that are coming up. Tonight, we want to tell you about some shows that you may want to go back and listen to in case you missed them. So we've had some really good stuff going on lately. Drew, tell us about what we've had.
Man, we've had a whirlwind of just kind of a marathon of great shows. So we've had Lenny Eckstein of Deerhammer. We had Steve Gorman on for a couple of parts, the drummer from the Black Crowes. We had Brian Hara, author of Bourbon Justice and a member of the Bourbon Community Roundtable. We had Nancy Fraley, an incredible musician and master blender, and all kind of just fascinating topics on that one. That was another two-parter. We had Eric Wolf from Stolen Wolf on to talk about the rye that he is sort of resurrected. And we had Chris Tack of the Cold Stairs, a fantastic blues rock trio on not too long ago as well.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate in the guests that we've been able to have on the show. And we've been fortunate tonight to have Brian. So
thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So until next time, on behalf of Drew and Brian, cheers, love, and free bird.
Here's to you, folks.
Good night, everybody.